Namaste. My name is Janapati Das, and we are here today to do another reading in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Please accept my respects, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'd like to take the opportunity to offer my respectful obeisances to Jagat Guru, Swarbananda Paramahamsa Srila Prabhupada, and to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who has purported and translated the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are starting Canto 1, first part of Canto 1, entitled Creation, but we are still reading through the introduction, which is the biography on Lord Chaitanya. And as always instructed by our spiritual masters, to please them, we start off by chanting Krishna's name. So please join along. Namosila Swarupananda Paramahamsa Namine Kodakaruna Swarupaya Krishna Vistayate Namosila Swarupananda Paramahamsa Namine Kodakaruna Swarupaya Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasudeva Bhaktivinoda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasudeva Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I was born in the darkness, ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Okay, so Continuing on in our introduction and the story of Lord Chaitanya, lots of very wonderful pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. During his householder life, the Lord did not display many of the miracles which are generally expected from such personalities, but he did once perform a wonderful miracle in the house of Srinivasa Thakur, while Sankirtan was in full swing. He asked the devotees what they wanted to eat, and when he was informed that they wanted to eat mangoes, he asked for a seed of a mango. Although this fruit was out of season, when the seed was brought to him, he sowed it in the yard of Srinivasa, and at once a creeper began to grow out of the seed. Within no time, this creeper became a full-grown mango tree, heavy with more ripened fruits than the devotees could eat. The tree remained in Srinivasa's yard, and from then on, the devotees used to take as many mangoes from the trees as they wanted. The Lord had a very high estimation of the affections of the damsels of Rajabhumi Vrindavan for Krishna, and in appreciation of their unalloyed service to the Lord, once Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanted the holy names of the gopis, cowherd girls, instead of the names of the Lord. At this time, some of his students, who were also disciples, came to see him, and when they saw that the Lord was chanting the names of the gopis, they were astonished. Out of sheer foolishness, they asked the Lord why he was chanting the names of the gopis and advised him to chant the name of Krishna. The Lord, who was in ecstasy, was thus disturbed by these foolish students. He chastised them and chased them away. The students were almost the same age as the Lord, and thus they wrongly thought of the Lord as one of their peers. They held a meeting and resolved that they would attack the Lord if he dared to punish them again in such a manner. The incident provoked some malicious talks about the Lord on the part of the general public. When the Lord became aware of this, he began to consider the various types of men found in society. He noted that especially the students, professors, fruitive workers, yogis, non-devotees, and different types of atheists were all opposed to the devotional service of the Lord. My mission is to deliver all the fallen souls of this age, he thought. But if they commit offenses against me, thinking me to be an ordinary man, they will not benefit. If they are to begin their life of spiritual realization, they must some way or another offer obeisances unto me. Thus the Lord decided to accept the renounced order of life, sannyas, because people in general were inclined to offer respects to a sannyasi. 500 years ago, the condition of society was not as degraded as it is today. At that time, people would show respects to a sannyasi, and the sannyasi was rigid in following the rules and regulations of the renounced order of life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not very much in favor of the renounced order of life in this age of Kali, but that was only for the reason that very few sannyasis in this age are able to observe the rules and regulations of sannyas life. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu decided to accept the order and become an ideal sannyasi so that the general populace would show him respect. One is duty-bound to show respect to a sannyasi, for a sannyasi is considered to be the master of all varnas and ashrams. While he was contemplating accepting the sannyas order, it so happened that Keshava Bharati, a sannyasi of the Mayavadi school and resident of Katva in Bengal, visited Navadvip and was invited to dine with the Lord. When Keshava Bharati came to his house, the Lord asked him to award him the sannyas order of life. This was a matter of formality. The sannyasa order is to be accepted from another sannyasi. Although the Lord was independent in all respects, still to keep up the formalities of the Shastras, he accepted sannyasa order from Keshava Bharati, although Keshava Bharati was not in the Vaishnava Sampradaya school. After consulting with Keshava Bharati, the Lord left Navadvip for Katva to formally accept the sannyasa order of life. He was accompanied by Srila Nityananda Prabhu, Chandra Shekhara Acharya, and Mukunda Datta. These three assisted him in details of the ceremony. The incident of the Lord accepting the sannyas order is very elaborately described in the Chaitanya Bhagavat by Srila Vrindavan Das Thakur. Thus, at the end of his 24th year, the Lord accepted the sannyas order of life in the month of Magha. After accepting this order, he became a full-fledged preacher of the Bhagavat Dharma. Although he was doing the same preaching work in his householder life, when he experienced some obstacles to his preaching, he sacrificed even the comfort of his home life for the sake of the fallen souls. In his householder life, his chief assistants were Srila Adwaita Prabhu and Srila Srivas Thakur. But after he accepted the sannyasa order, his chief assistants became Srila Nityananda Prabhu, who was deputed to preach specifically in Bengal, and the six Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Gopala Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, headed by Srila Rupa and Sanatan, who were deputed to go to Vrindavan to excavate the present places of pilgrimage. The present city of Vrindavan and the importance of Rajabhumi were thus disclosed by the will of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The Lord, after accepting the sannyasa order, at once wanted to start for Vrindavan. For 3 continuous days he traveled in the Radha Desha, places where the Ganges does not flow. He was in full ecstasy over the idea of going to Vrindavan. However, Srila Nityananda diverted his path and brought him instead to the house of Adwaita Prabhu in Shantipur. The Lord stayed at Sri Adwaita Prabhu's house for a few days, and knowing well that the Lord was leaving his hearth and home for good, Sri Adwaita Prabhu sent his men to Navadvip to bring his mother Shachi to have a last meeting with her son. Some unscrupulous people say that the Lord Chaitanya met his wife also after taking sannyas and offered her his wooden slipper for worship, but the authentic sources give no information about such a meeting. His mother met him at the house at Adwaita Prabhu, and when she saw her son in sannyas, she lamented. By way of compromise, she requested her son to make his headquarters in Puri, so that she would easily be able to get information about him. The Lord granted this last desire of his beloved mother. After the incident, the Lord started for Puri, leaving all the residents of Navadvip in an ocean of lamentation over his separation. The Lord visited many important places on the way to Puri. He visited the temple of Gopinathaji, who had stolen condensed milk for his devotee, Srila Madhavendra Puri. Since then, deity Gopinathaji is well known as Kshira Kora Gopinatha. The Lord relished this story with great pleasure. The propensity of stealing is there even in the absolute consciousness, but because this propensity is exhibited by the absolute, it loses its perverted nature and thus becomes worshipable, even by Lord Chaitanya, on the basis of the absolute consideration that the Lord and his stealing propensity are one and identical. So, we brought this point up before. It's like, you hear about people stealing stuff from, whatever, elderly women, or stealing butter, or stealing the clothes of the unmarried gopi girls, in like Krishna sense, and these are all transcendental experiences. But you hear about anybody else doing that, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing, and you're disgusted by it. But when you hear Krishna and Lord Chaitanya do it, it's relishing, because it's, as it says, Bhaktivedanta says, it's non-different than Krishna. Therefore, it's a transcendental experience. This interesting story of Gopinathaji is vividly explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami. After visiting the temple of Kshira Kora Gopinatha of Ramuna at Balasore in Orissa, the Lord proceeded towards Puri, and on the way he visited the temple of Shakshi Gopala, who appeared as a witness in the matter of 2 Brahmana devotees' family quarrel. The Lord heard the story of Shakshi Gopala with great pleasure because he wanted to impress upon the atheists that the worshipable deities in the temples approved by the great acharyas are not idols, as alleged by men with poor fund of knowledge. So you have Muslims and people who are interpreting, "You shall not have any idols in front of me," but the deities, the Archana is what is known as Archana. So it's the manifestation of Krishna in the deity form. It's not just, we don't worship the stone and the iron or whatever the material that's there, and Krishna can enter into any of his energies. So Krishna is not also an idol, right? It's an idol is something that is not God, right? In the story of Shakshi, the deity in the temple is the Arca incarnation of the personality of Godhead. And thus the deity is identical with the Lord in all respects. He responds to the proportion of the devotee's affection for him. In the story of Shakshi Gopala, in which there was a family misunderstanding by two devotees of the Lord, in order to mitigate the turmoil, as well as to show specific favor to his servitors, traveled from Vrindavan to Vijayanagara, village in Odisha, in the form of his Arca incarnation. From there, the deity was brought to Cuttack, and thus the temple of Shakshi Gopala is even today visited by thousands of pilgrims on the way to Jagannath Puri. The Lord stayed overnight there and began to proceed toward Puri. On his way, the sannyas rod was broken by Nityananda Prabhu. The Lord became apparently angry with him about this and went alone to Puri, leaving his companions behind. At Puri, when he entered the temple of Jagannath, he became at once saturated with transcendental ecstasy and fell down on the floor of the temple unconscious. The custodians of the temple could not understand the transcendental feats of the Lord, but there was a great learned Pandita named Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya who was present, and he could understand that the Lord's losing his consciousness upon entering the Jagannath temple was not an ordinary thing. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who was the chief appointed Pandit in the court of the king of Odisha, Maharaj Prataparutra, was attracted by the youthful luster of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and could understand that such a transcendental trance was only rarely exhibited, and only then by the topmost devotees who are already on the transcendental plane in complete forgetfulness of material existence. Only a liberated soul could show such a transcendental feat, and the Bhattacharya, who is vastly learned, could understand that this in the light of the transcendental literature with which he was familiar. He therefore asked the custodians of the temple not to disturb the unknown sannyasi. He asked them to take the Lord to his home so he could be further observed in his unconscious state. The Lord was at once carried to the home of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who at that time had sufficient power of authority due to his being the Sabda Pandit, or the state dean of facility in Sanskrit literatures. The learned Pandita wanted to scrutinizingly test the transcendental feats of Lord Chaitanya, because often unscrupulous devotees imitate physical feats in order to flaunt transcendental achievements just to attract innocent people and take advantage of them. A learned scholar like the Bhattacharya can detect such impostors, and when he finds them out, he at once rejects them. In the case of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhattacharya tested all the symptoms in the light of the Shastras. He tested as a scientist, not as a foolish sentimentalist. So he's using all facilities to dictate the truth by, all of his mental facilities that he's capable of using. He observed the movement of the stomach, the beating of the heart, and the breathing of the nostrils. He also felt the pulse of the Lord and saw that his bodily activities were in complete suspension. When he put a small cotton swab before the nostrils, he found that there was a slight breathing of the fine fibers of cotton, and cotton moved slightly. Thus he came to know that the Lord's unconscious trance was genuine, and he began to treat him in the prescribed fashion. But Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could only be treated in a special way. He would respond only to the resounding of the holy names of the Lord by his devotees. Thus, special treatment was unknown to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, because the Lord was still unknown to him. When the Bhattacharya saw him for the first time in the temple, he simply took him to be one of many pilgrims. In the meantime, the companions of the Lord, who reached the temple a little after him, heard of the Lord's transcendental feats and of his being carried away by the Bhattacharya. The pilgrims at the temple were still gossiping about the incident, but by chance one of these pilgrims had met Gopinath Acharya, who was known to Gadadhar Pandit, and from him it was learned that the Lord was lying in an unconscious state at the residence of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Gopinath Acharya. All the members of the party were introduced by Gadadhar Pandit to Gopinath Acharya, who took them all to the house of Bhattacharya, where the Lord was lying unconscious in a spiritual trance. All the members then chanted loudly the holy name of the Lord Hari as usual, and the Lord regained his consciousness. After this, Bhattacharya received all the members of the party, including Lord Nityananda Prabhu, and he asked them to become his guests of honor. The party, including the Lord, went for a bath in the sea, and the Bhattacharya arranged for the residence and meals at the house of Kashi Mishra. Gopinatha Acharya, his brother-in-law, also assisted. There was some friendly talks about the Lord's divinity between the two brothers-in-law, and in this argument, Gopinath Acharya, who knew the Lord before, now tried to establish the Lord as the personality of Godhead, and the Bhattacharya tried to establish him as one of the great devotees. Both of them argued from the angle of vision of authentic Shastras and not on the strength of sentimental populi. The incarnations of God are determined by authentic Shastras and not by popular votes of foolish fanatics. Because Lord Chaitanya was an incarnation of God, in fact, foolish fanatics have proclaimed that so many so-called incarnations of God in this age without referring to authentic scriptures. But Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya or Gopinatha Acharya did not indulge in such foolish sentimentalism. On the contrary, both of them tried to establish or reject his divinity on the strength of authentic Shastras. Later, it was disclosed that Bhattacharya also came from Navadvip area, and it was understood from him that Nilambarka Chakravarti, the maternal grandfather of Lord Chaitanya, happened to be a class fellow of the father of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. In that sense, the Lord Sannyasi, Lord Chaitanya, invoked paternal affection from the Bhattacharya. Bhattacharya was a professor of many sannyasis in the order of the Shankaracharya Sampradaya, which is the founding monist impersonalist philosophy started by Shankaracharya. And he himself also belonged to that cult. As such, the Bhattacharya desired that the young sannyasi Lord Chaitanya also hear from him about the teachings of Vedanta. That should be interesting. Those who are followers of the Shankara cult are generally known as Vedantists. This does not, however, mean that Vedanta is a monopoly study in the Shankara Sampradaya. Yeah, it's true. Vaishnavas study the Vedas as well, stated by Vedanta Shastras. But our conclusions are different because we go by scripture, whereas Shankaracharya went by interpretation and speculation. And the commentary of the Vedanta Sutras was the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is why Vyasadeva in the story had translated for Kali Yuga, had transcribed all the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Vedanta Sutras, the Vedas, down in writing for the people in the age of Kali, because they would not have a very good memory, so they wrote them down. But however, he wasn't satisfied, and he inquired from his spiritual master Narada Muni about this, and Narada Muni said, because you have failed to include about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore the vision for the Srimad Bhagavatam was revealed to Vyasadeva through the mercy of his spiritual master Narada Muni. But those in the Shankara Sampradaya are generally known to be ignorant of the knowledge of the Vedantist Vaishnavas. For this reason, the Bhaktivedanta title was first offered to the author by the Vaishnavas. There's the word Bhaktivedanta. Vedanta. The conclusion of Vedanta is Bhakti. So therefore, in devotion to God, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the Absolute Truth. The Lord agreed to take lessons from Bhattacharya on the Vedanta, and they sat together in the temple of Lord Jagannath. The Bhattacharya went on speaking continually for 7 days, and the Lord heard him with all attention and did not interrupt. The Lord's silence raised some doubt in Bhattacharya's heart, and he asked the Lord how it was that he did not ask anything or comment on his explanations of Vedanta. The Lord posed himself before the Bhattacharya as a foolish student and pretended that he heard the Vedanta from him, but because the Bhattacharya felt that this was the duty of a sannyasi, but the Lord did not agree with his lectures. By this, the Lord indicated that the so-called Vedantists among the Shankara Sampradaya or any other Sampradaya who do not follow the instructions of Srila Vyasadeva are mechanical students of the Vedanta. So it's very interesting because the Vedantists quote and study the Vedanta Sutras, but they state that the author of all these literatures that were written down was mistaken in the writing of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The conclusion of the Srimad Bhagavatam was not correct, a correct interpretation of the Vedanta, which is actually offensive because Srila Vyasadeva is a literary incarnation of Krishna, and you're basically saying that he was right about one thing but not right about the actual interpretation of it. They are not fully aware of that great knowledge. The explanation of the Vedanta Sutra is given by the author himself in the text of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there we go. One who has no knowledge of the Bhagavatam will hardly be able to know what the Vedanta says. Yeah, it's one of those things, you have these different scriptures, whether it be the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, or any of these literatures, without the conclusions that are at the heart of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhattacharya, being a vastly learned man, could follow the Lord's sarcastic remark on the popular Vedantist. He therefore asked him why he did not ask about any point which he could not follow. The Bhattacharya could understand the purpose of his dead silence for the days he heard him. But this showed clearly that the Lord had something else in mind, thus the Bhattacharya requested him to disclose his mind. Upon this, the Lord spoke as follows. This is a devotee, so he's an impersonalist, but he's actually has enough spiritual vision to be respectful to Lord Chaitanya and asking him to clarify. Upon this, the Lord spoke as follows: My dear sir, I can understand the meaning of the sutras like Janmadhyasya Yata Shastra Yoni Tvat and Atato Brahma Jinyasha of the Vedanta Sutra, but when you explain them in your own way, that was these conclusions are explained in their own way, their own interpretations. See, this is the problem with commentaries, which Bhaktivedanta was also saying, the commentaries on translators of Bhagavad Gita, they had their own interpretation without really being in a disciplic lineage. They just translate the Sanskrit and say, you know what I think, just as what Arjuna was doing. I mean, the full purport of the Bhagavad Gita is that you surrender to Krishna, and Krishna informs you of the information via your spiritual master. And so in this case, Arjuna was taking a spiritual master in Krishna and was taking the lower position and receiving the information as. But here these commentaries of the Bhagavad Gita want to be the authority speakers. They want to interpret their own version as being the guru or the sort of surrogate Krishna. It's pretty amazing, actually. So Krishna was saying, or Lord Chaitanya was basically implying that he was wrong in this interpretation, his own interpretation of the Vedanta Sutras. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay. The purpose of the sutras is already explained to them, but your explanations are covering them with something else. Right? The truth is already there, but you're actually putting a whole new layer of paint on that. That's your own thing. This is what impersonalists do. They don't actually have any backing of like real authority from the scriptures. They just interpret themselves. They write their own commentaries. You do not purposefully take the direct meaning of the sutras, but indirectly give your own interpretations. The Lord thus attacked all Vedantists to interpret the Vedanta Sutra fashionably according to their own limited power of thinking to serve their own purpose. Once again, it's there to serve their own purpose, serve them as a great authority. This was why Bhaktivedanta was saying about these commentary, these so-called professors and scholars, they're just doing it for their own glory, their own whatever. Like, oh, look at my interpretation. I remember this. So it reminds me of, I was in a bookstore one time and I was looking through some Bhaktivedanta. They had some Bhaktivedanta commentaries of Bhagavad Gita, and in the bookstore, sometimes you find these things, Bhaktivedanta's books, which are really nice. But amidst all the garbage dump, as Srila Prabhupada would say, there's these few gems of wisdom. The bookstores have all this garbage, right? And then you can find something, right? But the guy at the bookstore was all like, oh, have you heard of Oppenheimer? Oppenheimer is kind of termed as the father of the atomic bomb. They made a movie about him. He committed suicide, but he was a very smart guy, and he took Einstein's theories and created a bomb that killed thousands of people and have launched us into the potential nuclear war potentials, the arms race and everything, created the atomic bomb. And he did that. He translated the Bhagavad Gita and had an interpretation. In fact, he very famously coined one of the terms in the Bhagavad Gita, now I've become the destroyer of words, taking it way out of context. And so this guy at the bookstore was like talking to me about he wanted to do his commentary about the Bhagavad Gita, and he said, oh, have you read Oppenheimer's translation of Bhagavad Gita? I said, no, I'm not going to read that. And he started telling me about the story of the Bhagavad Gita. It was completely wrong, and his conclusions of Oppenheimer's conclusions. And I said, no, that's completely wrong. And I told him what Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada would explain. He kind of shut him up because he just didn't. He was like, whoa, So anyway. The Lord continued, Srila Vyasadeva summarized the direct meanings. Okay, yeah, such indirect interpretations of the authentic literatures like the Vedanta Sutras are hereby condemned by the Lord. The Lord continued, Srila Vyasadeva summarized the direct meanings of the mantras in the Upanishads in the Vedanta Sutra. Unfortunately, you do not take the direct meaning. You indirectly interpret them in a different way. The authority of the Vedas is unchallengeable. That's what it. Veda means truth. You don't change, you don't interpret the Vedas. It is what it is. It stands without any question of doubt. So the Sampradaya, the Brahma Sampradaya, Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, is a direct telephone wire from Krishna. The information is handed down as it is. That's why the book, the Bhagavad Gita, is Bhaktivedanta referred to it as it is. It's not like interpretation or hearsay or whatever. It is as it is, as Bhaktivedanta received it from Bhaktisiddhanta, and as my own Srila Prabhupada, Jagadguru, received it from Bhaktivedanta. And as I'm telling you now, I am not creating any kind of a speculation or my own thoughts or whatever. I'm telling you what I've heard from my spiritual master in this lineage. So the authority of the Vedas is unchallengeable and stands without any question of doubt. Whatever is stated in the Vedas must be accepted completely. Otherwise, one challenges the authority of the Vedas. So a lot of times, what comes out of the Vedas, the absolute truth, that's why it's referred to as absolute truth. It trumps empirical science, because empirical science is based upon measurement and speculation, and a lot of mental speculation, and therefore the conclusions of that are, well, it could be this, it might be that, it could be that, and that's what philosophy is. When we talk about Vedas, the truth is there as it is. When somebody says, prove it to us, we say, there it is, right there. This is the proof. We don't need to measure something with a faulty factor of our brains, of our mental capacity, which is so limited. The conch shell and cow dung are bone and stool of two living beings. But because they have been recommended by the Vedas as pure, people accept them as such because of the authority of the Vedas. The idea is that one cannot set his imperfect reason above the authority of the Vedas. The orders of the Vedas must be obeyed and as they stand without any mundane reasoning. The so-called followers of the Vedic injunctions make their own interpretations of the Vedic injunctions, and thus they establish different parties and sects of the Vedic religion. Lord Buddha directly denied the authority of the Vedas, and he established his own religion. Only for this reason the Buddhist religion was not accepted by the strict followers of the Vedas, but those who are so-called followers of the Vedas are more harmful than the Buddhists. The Buddhists have the courage to deny the Vedas directly, but the so-called followers of the Vedas have no courage to deny the Vedas, although indirectly they disobey all the injunctions of the Vedas. Lord Chaitanya condemned this. The examples given by the Lord of the conch shell and the cow dung are very much appropriate in this connection. If one argues that since cow dung is pure, the stool of a learned Brahmana is still more pure, his argument will not be accepted. Cow dung is accepted, and the stool of a highly posed Brahmana is rejected. The Lord continued, the Vedic injunctions are self-authorized, and if some mundane creature adjusts the interpretations of the Vedas, he defies their authority. It is foolish to think of oneself as more intelligent than Srila Vyasadeva. Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to say Srila Vyasadeva is not intelligent and was mistaken? The Supreme Personality of Godhead incarnation? He has already expressed himself in his sutras, and there is no need of help from personalities of lesser importance. So Bhaktivedanta is basically calling, these people, these impersonalist gurus, as less important. They don't have the authority to trump Srila Vyasadeva. His work, the Vedanta Sutra, is as dazzling as the midday sun, and when someone tries to give his own interpretations on the self-effulgent sun-like Vedanta Sutra, he attempts to cover the sun with a cloud of his imagination. That's a beautiful example. And so the impersonalists, they're like, oh, well, what Vedanta Srila Vyasadeva really meant was this, or what the Bhagavad Gita really means is this. And what they're really saying is that my authority is greater than God's, or my authority is I'm able to interpret exactly, which is just speculation, just like empirical science. The Vedas and the Puranas are one and the same in purpose. They ascertain the absolute truth, which is greater than everything else. The absolute truth is ultimately realized as the absolute personality of Godhead with absolute controlling power. As such, the absolute personality of Godhead must be completely full of opulence, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. Yet the transcendental personality of Godhead is astonishingly ascertained as impersonal. This is what they're saying. They're saying, although Krishna is said to have all opulence, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, because we don't know any person who doesn't, there's no non-entity that has these kind of things. We can see it's a personality, but yet they ascertain, no, actually Krishna is impersonal, or God is impersonal, and it's just all these gods and demigods, they're just illusions, they're just Maya, and you just merge into them into the great oneness. The impersonal description of the absolute truth in the Vedas is given to nullify the mundane conception of the absolute whole. Personal features of the Lord are completely different from all kinds of mundane features. The living entities are all individual persons, and they are all parts and parcels of the supreme whole. If the parts and parcels are individual persons, the source of their emanation must not be impersonal. He is the supreme person amongst all the relative persons. The Vedas inform us that from him, Brahman, everything emanates, and on him everything rests, and after annihilation, everything merges in him only. Therefore, he is the ultimate dative, causative, and accommodating cause of all causes. All these causes cannot be attributed to an impersonal object, and which is also why it says in the Sri Upanishad, the absolute truth is a complete whole. Is a complete whole, and from all the emanations are also complete in themselves. So an impersonal feature is not complete because it lacks the personal feature. Whereas this three God realization, we understand that Bhagavan is the absolute truth is the supreme personality of Godhead. From him, emanations come in the form of Paramatma, which is partial realization, God and Lord in the heart, expansion of the Kshirodaksha Vishnu into the heart of all living beings. And from the last feature, the effulgence, is the Brahman, which is the impersonal feature of the Lord, which impersonalists talk about, which is actually the glow of the aura of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or Bhagavan. The Vedas inform that The Vedas inform us that he alone became many, and when he so desires, he glances over material nature. Before he glanced over material nature, there was no material cosmic creation. Therefore, his glance is not material. Material mind or senses were unborn when the Lord glanced over material nature. Thus, evidence in the Vedas proves that beyond a doubt the Lord has transcendental eyes and a transcendental mind. They are not material. His impersonality, therefore, is a negation of his materiality, but not a denial of his transcendental personality. That was a really important point. Let me read that again. His impersonality, therefore, is a negation of his materiality, stating that he's not material, that the impersonal form of him is just a negation of that, but is not a denial that he doesn't exist in a spiritual form. Brahman ultimately refers to the personality of Godhead. Impersonal Brahman realization is just the negative conception of the mundane creations. Paramatma is the localized aspect of Brahman within all kinds of material bodies. Ultimately, the Supreme Brahman realization is the realization of the personality of Godhead according to all evidence of the revealed scriptures. He is the ultimate source of Vishnu Tattvas. The Puranas are also supplementary to the Vedas. The Vedic mantras are too difficult for an ordinary man. Women, Shudras, and the so-called twice-born higher castes are unable to penetrate into the sense of the Vedas, and thus the Mahabharata as well as the Puranas are made easy to explain the truths of the Vedas. In his prayers before the boy Sri Krishna, Brahma said that there is no limit to the fortune of the residents of Raja Bhumi, headed by Sri Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Mai, because the eternal absolute truth has become their intimate relative. The Vedic mantra explains that the absolute truth has no legs and no hands, and yet goes faster than all and accepts everything that is offered to him in devotion. So this is referred to in the Sri Ishopanishad, right? The latter statement definitely suggests the personal feature of the Lord, although his hands and legs are distinguished from mundane hands and legs or other senses. Brahman, therefore, is never impersonal. But when such mantras are indirectly interpreted, it is wrongly thought that the absolute truth is impersonal. The absolute truth, personality of Godhead, is full of all opulences, and therefore he has a transcendental form of full existence, knowledge, and bliss. How then can one establish that the absolute truth is impersonal? Brahman, being full of opulences, is understood to have manifold energies, and all these energies are classified under three headings of the authority of the Vishnu Purana 6.7.60, which says that the transcendental energies of Lord Vishnu are primarily three. His spiritual energy and the energy of the living entities are classified as superior energy, whereas the material energy is an inferior one which is sprouted out of ignorance. The energy of the living entities is technically called Kshetrajna energy. This Kshetrajna Shakti, although equal in quality with the Lord, becomes overpowered by material energy out of ignorance and thus suffers all sorts of material miseries. In other words, the living entities are located in the marginal energy because the superior spiritual and inferior material energies, and in proportion to the living being's contact with either the material or spiritual energies, the living entity is situated in proportionately higher and lower levels of existence. So that's why it's referred to as the living entity. The Jivatma is a marginal energy. It's between the influence of Krishna, or the supreme spiritual energy, and Maya Devi, the material energy. Depending on what it desires, it can come under the influence of material energy, but if it turns its focus to Krishna and serves the spiritual energy, it will be drawn towards that. The Lord is beyond the inferior and marginal energies as above mentioned, and his spiritual energy is manifested in three different phases as eternal existence, eternal bliss, and eternal knowledge, Satchitananda. Right? As far as eternal existence is concerned, it is conducted by the Sandini potency. Similarly, bliss and knowledge are conducted by the Halandini and Samvit potencies, respectively. As the supreme energetic Lord, he is the supreme controller of the spiritual, marginal, and material energies. And all these different types of energies are connected with the Lord in eternal devotional service. Amazing. The Supreme Personality of God, it is thus enjoying in his transcendental eternal form. It is not astounding that one dares to call the Supreme Lord non-energetic. The Lord is the controller of all energies, and the living entities are parts and parcels of one of the energies. Therefore, there is a gulf of difference between the Lord and the living entities. How then can one say that the Lord and the living entities are one and the same? In the Bhagavad Gita, also the living entities are described as belonging to the superior energy of the Lord. According to the principles of intimate correlation between the energy and the energetic, both of them are non-different also. Therefore, the Lord and the living entities are non-different as the energy and the energetic. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego are all inferior energies of the Lord, but the living entities are different from the all as superior energy. This is the version of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, verse 4. And so we are actually beginning in our Bhagavad Gita class, chapter 7, so we talk about these gross material energies and subtle energies that are covering the living entity. And I think we'll probably end it there for today, and we'll continue with the introduction. It's a long introduction, but we're almost done, around halfway through. So maybe next time we'll finish it. Thank you very much. Namaste.